My daughter told me I was a loser, that the work of my entire life was worth nothing. She even said she didn't really want to see me at her wedding. As I looked at the mountain of bills I'd paid for her over the years, and the new one she expected me to cover without hesitation, I realized something painfully simple. In her eyes, I wasn't a father. I was a wallet with a pulse. So I gave her exactly what she wanted. And on the day of her first wedding, the day she believed would crown her new life, she received a lesson she'll remember for the rest of her days, along with an inheritance she will be paying for far longer than she ever imagined. Before I tell you how everything collapsed right in front of her, let me know in the comments where you're listening from. And hit that subscribe button if you believe that respect is earned, not inherited, bought, or demanded. Dana and her fiancé, Evan, sat across from me on the leather sofa my late wife Marlene chose all those years ago. Calling this a visit would have been generous. A visit suggests warmth, maybe even affection. What I saw in front of me felt more like a board meeting where I was the only person who didn't realize I was expected to sign the checks. On the coffee table I built with my own hands lay a thick ivory binder. Embossed in gold were the words, "The Wedding of Dana Carter and Evan Wright." But nothing about it felt romantic. It looked like a contract proposal, one I hadn't agreed to review. Dana flipped through its glossy pages with a speed that made my stomach tighten, her perfectly manicured nails tapping prices and vendor logos like she was presenting a quarterly financial report. "So here's where we're at, Dad," she said in that polished, neutral voice she used when she wanted to sound professional. We locked in the venue, Hawthorne Manor. The Aldridge family uses it for all their events. It reflects the standard we need. I nodded. At 71, I've learned that silent patience often reveals more than words. I spent my entire life working as a structural engineer. My days were built around stress loads, material limits, and calculations that couldn't lie. I understood standards, but hers were different. I expected a bridge to survive a hurricane. My daughter expected her guests to be impressed by the champagne. Dana turned another page. "These are our preferred vendors. Rosevale Floral Studio is handling the arrangements. They guaranteed they can source the Dutch white roses Evan's mother wants." Evan, who had barely moved a muscle since sitting down, finally cleared his throat and offered a smile so rehearsed it felt borrowed. "She'll be thrilled, Mr. Carter. Details matter." Oh, I knew that. A single bolt installed wrong could bring down an entire structure. And right now, this project sitting in my living room was full of loose bolts. "It all seems very organized," I said carefully, choosing each word like I was writing an incident report. "Let me see the numbers." Dana turned to a page packed with spreadsheets. "Here's the preliminary budget," she said. "The estate is $120,000, including basic catering for 200 guests. Flowers will run around $25,000. Photography and video, $18,000. My dress," she lifted a shoulder, "probably 15. She listed these figures like she was naming items on a grocery receipt. I didn't blink. I'd managed infrastructure contracts worth millions. Numbers didn't scare me. But those numbers built bridges and water systems, things that served communities for decades. These numbers? They funded a 6-hour performance. "So," I finally asked, meeting her eyes, "what exactly do you need from me?" Dana closed the binder with a snap that echoed in my chest. "Everything is ready. I just need you to fund the account I set up. A joint account for all wedding expenses." And there it was. Not a request. Not a conversation. An instruction. I wasn't the father of the bride. I was the financier. I looked at my daughter long enough to search for the little girl who once begged to help me draw blueprints at my drafting table. She wasn't there. Instead, I saw a woman with sharp eyes and a flawless spending plan. "Oh, by the way," she added casually, flipping back to the photographer section. "After the wedding, Evan and I are selling this place." The words hit harder than any number on that spreadsheet. This house, the home I built from nothing when the lot was nothing more than wild brush, was apparently just another chip in a financial game I didn't know I was playing. "It's too outdated," she continued, completely unaware of the blow she'd just delivered. "And we'll need money for a down payment in the Aldridge neighborhood. A fresh start. A fresh start built on the rubble of my life." My eyes drifted to the portrait of Marlene above the fireplace. Her smile still filled the room with a warmth I hadn't felt since she passed. Behind her in the photo was the rose arbor I spent an entire summer building, sweating under the sun while she brought me iced tea with garden soil still on her hands. "It'll be the prettiest corner of the world," she told me then. And she was right. Every summer those roses bloomed like they were determined to prove that beauty can grow out of hard work. And now my own daughter wanted to sell it all in a single transaction. The weight in my chest grew heavier. She didn't see this home. She saw equity. She didn't see memories. She saw leverage. And as she kept flipping through her binder, comparing lighting styles and menu designs, I realized that this meeting wasn't about a wedding at all. It was the start of a demolition, one she expected me to fund. Dana kept talking as if she were presenting a quarterly report rather than discussing her own wedding. Evan nodded beside her, silent but supportive, the way someone nods when they've already rehearsed their part. The catering is locked in, she continued, flipping another glossy page. $500 per person for the tasting menu, but trust me, it's worth it. And of course, we're choosing the premium champagne. At Hawthorne, people expect that. I stayed quiet, my hands folded in my lap, letting her voice drift around the room without letting any of it settle. Her tone never shifted, not with excitement, not with nerves, just practiced efficiency. She had no idea that every price she listed pushed another crack into what I thought our relationship had been built on. For years, I assumed that raising a child with love, stability, and sacrifice would guide them toward gratitude. Instead, Dana had grown into someone who believed value came from cost, not meaning. And she sat there in my living room proving it with every number she threw at me. When she finally closed the binder, she set her palms on it like she was sealing a deal. This wedding is going to define our future. Evan's family cares a lot about presentation. The Aldridges expect a certain image. Evan straightened up and forced another polite smile. They're traditional. They just appreciate things being done properly. The right image. That was the recurring theme. I knew what it meant. It meant keeping up appearances at all costs. And for the first time, I understood that Dana wasn't just planning a wedding. She was planning a climb into a world where everything was measured in status, and she expected me to pay her admission. I asked the question anyway. And what image is that? She didn't hesitate. Success. Stability. Class. We can't have people thinking we came from nothing. The sentence landed heavier than anything she'd said. I didn't remind her of the nights I spent working late to make sure she had every opportunity. I didn't bring up the years of coming home covered in dust and grease so she could live comfortably. I didn't tell her that everything she took for granted now came from the nothing she dismissed. Instead, I asked, "So how much of this am I covering?" She blinked, as if surprised I even needed clarification. "All of it, Dad. That's why we're here." She pushed the binder toward me. "I already set up the joint account. Payments will go through there. It's easier that way." Easier, for her. I didn't touch the binder. She misread my silence as reluctance instead of evaluation. "Look," she said, "this is normal. Most fathers pay for the wedding. Some give a house as a gift. Evan's parents did that for his sister. It's just how things are done in their circle." Evan nodded again, though a flicker of discomfort crossed his face. Not enough to stop him, just enough to show he knew how shameless this looked. Then Dana delivered the final blow as casually as commenting on the weather. "After the wedding, Evan and I are selling this house." The words were so sharp and direct that for a second, I thought I'd misheard her. "Sell this place?" I repeated quietly. "Yes. We'll need money for a down payment in the Aldridge neighborhood. This house just doesn't fit the lifestyle we want." Lifestyle? She didn't see the walls I'd patched with my own hands. She didn't see the garden Marlene poured her heart into. She didn't see the floor where she'd taken her first steps. She saw a source of cash, a stepping stone, something to strip for parts. Evan finally chimed in. "They're right, sir. The Aldridge area aligns better with the life we're building." The life they were building didn't include me. I looked at both of them and, for the first time, saw everything clearly. Her entitlement, his passivity, their shared expectation that I would smile, nod, and finance the entire performance. A strange calm settled over me then. I didn't argue. I didn't raise my voice. Arguments don't fix cracked foundations. They just delay the inevitable collapse. Instead, I said, "All right, Dana. I hear you." She smiled, relieved. She thought I understood her vision. But what I understood was something far different. I understood this wasn't a conversation about a wedding. It was a transaction, one I was expected to fund without question. And for the first time in my life, I realized I didn't have to agree to the terms. After Dana and Evan left that afternoon, the house felt unfamiliar. It was the same structure I had lived in for nearly 4 decades, yet the air felt heavier, as if someone had opened a window and let something cold slip inside. I sat alone in the living room, staring at the space where the ivory wedding binder had rested only minutes before. It had left behind a faint indentation on the coffee table, a small physical reminder of the pressure my daughter believed she had the right to place on me. I didn't move for a long time. I simply let the silence settle and listened to the low hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen, the same one Dana had once plastered with her school drawings. I remembered those mornings when she'd sit at this very table, swinging her small legs under the chair while practicing spelling words. "Dad," she used to say, proud and glowing, "one day I'm going to build things like you." Somewhere along the way, ambition replaced gratitude and expectation replaced affection. But I didn't blame her entirely. Not then, not yet. Entitlement doesn't grow on its own. It has to be fed, and I had fed it for years. After Marlene passed, I filled every empty space with generosity, trying to compensate for a loss I could never prevent. Whenever Dana asked for something, I gave it. When she made mistakes, I fixed them. When she overspent, I covered it. I convinced myself it was love. Now I could see it had been something else. It had been surrender, and surrender always has a price. I stood up, feeling the stiffness in my knees, and walked into the kitchen. I poured myself a glass of water, steadying my hands on the counter as I took a drink. Only then did I realize I wasn't shaken. I was disappointed, yes, but under that disappointment was something sharper, a clarity I hadn't felt in years. I set the glass down and went into my study, a room that had always been my refuge. It smelled faintly of old paper and cedar. On the far wall hung a framed blueprint of the first major project I ever completed, a suspension bridge that still stood strong across the river. I stared at that drawing for a long moment. That bridge had survived 15 storms, 2 major floods, and decades of wear. It endured because it was built on principles that never failed: measure honestly, reinforce the weak points, and never ignore the warning signs. A family wasn't so different, and mine had been sending warning signs for a long time. I sat down at my desk, opened my laptop, and pulled up my banking dashboard. Dana had already added the joint account. Her name sat beside mine, a neat little digital signature of assumption. I clicked it open. She had even titled it Wedding Operations. Operations, as if marriage were a corporate launch. A string of pending invoices was already lined up. Caterer, venue deposit, lighting designer, florist. Half of them had due dates within a week. She hadn't waited for my approval. She had assumed my compliance. For the first time, I allowed myself to feel the anger behind the disappointment. Not the explosive kind, but the cold, precise anger of someone who has just uncovered the blueprint of a deception. And yet, beneath it was something heavier, a quiet grief that the daughter I loved hadn't even seen the disrespect she had shown. She didn't think she had done anything wrong. She believed it was normal, expected, deserved. I closed the account tab and leaned back in my chair. I needed to understand the full structure of this situation before taking any action. Emotional decisions were unstable ones, so I forced myself to revisit every detail from that afternoon. The binder, the numbers, the assumption of control, the plan to sell my home, the way Evan nodded through her demands, absorbing every benefit without contributing an ounce of responsibility. Piece by piece, the pattern revealed itself. This wasn't just a wedding. It was a takeover, a restructuring of my life without my consent. And the most alarming part was that neither of them believed they were doing anything wrong. They thought they were entitled to it. And entitlement, once rooted, doesn't shrink on its own. It has to be confronted or dismantled. With a slow exhale, I realized something that should have been obvious sooner. The only reason they felt so emboldened was because I had never set a boundary strong enough to resist them. The structure had cracked long before this wedding. I had simply refused to see it. I closed the laptop, stood up, and walked to the window overlooking the backyard. The roses Marlene planted were dormant now, but even in their bare winter branches, they held more meaning than any number Dana had shown me today. They represented effort, patience, and care, things Dana never had to learn because I had never forced her to. My fault, my hand, my design flaw. But flaws could be corrected, structures could be reinforced, and some could be rebuilt entirely. As I watched the light fade from the sky, something settled inside me. Not anger, not sorrow, but resolve. For the first time in years, I wasn't reacting. I was planning. And unlike my daughter, I understood the value of a solid plan. I turned away from the window, walked back to the desk, and reached for my phone. If Dana wanted this wedding handled like a business operation, then I would treat it like one. And the first step in any failing project was simple. You identify the true cost. I dialed the number of someone who had always helped me calculate the cost of complex decisions. And as the phone rang, I felt the foundation beneath me steady. The shift had begun. My financial advisor, Mark Ellison, picked up on the second ring. He'd handled my accounts for nearly 25 years, long enough to notice the tension in my voice before I even explained why I was calling. "Leo," he asked carefully, "you doing all right?" I hesitated for half a second, not because I didn't know what to say, but because this was the first moment the reality of the situation felt fully official. "I'm fine," I told him, "but I need to understand a few things. And I need to do it before I make any decisions I can't undo." Mark didn't push. "What can I help with?" I explained everything in straightforward terms. No emotion, just facts. The engagement, the wedding demands, the joint account, the assumption that I'd liquidate assets, the way my daughter planned to sell my home as if she already owned it. Mark listened in silence, the kind of silence that only comes from someone who realizes the conversation is more serious than he expected. When I finished, he let out a slow breath. "Leo, you know I've worked with a lot of families over the years. A lot. And what you just described, that's not normal." I closed my eyes for a moment, not because his words surprised me, but because I already knew he was right. I just needed someone else to say it aloud. "So what do?" I asked quietly. "First," he said, "you protect yourself. You're 71. You have to think long-term. You have enough to live comfortably for the rest of your life, but not if you start pulling hundreds of thousands out for a wedding." I exhaled through my nose. "And the house?" He paused, weighing his answer. "You own it outright. It's your largest non-liquid asset. Selling it needs to be your decision, not anyone else's. And certainly not because someone pressured you." Pressured was a polite word. Manipulated was closer to the truth. "Leo," he continued, "I don't know your daughter, and I'm not going to judge her character. But I can tell you this. Anyone who demands that you drain your retirement for a one-day event does not have your best interests in mind." That comment lingered with more weight than anything else he'd said. "Let me ask you something," Mark added. "If Marlene were here, what would she tell you to do?" I swallowed hard. Her name hit me like a hammer to the chest. I looked toward her portrait above the fireplace, the one Dana kept ignoring earlier, as if it were clutter. What would Marlene say? I knew the answer. She'd put her hand on my shoulder and tell me to stand my ground. She'd tell me that love doesn't grow in a place where boundaries don't exist. She'd tell me that our home, her home, was not a line item on a budget. She'd say I've done enough, I finally said. "Then it's time to listen to her," Mark replied gently. We talked logistics for another 15 minutes. Asset protection, access limitations, liability concerns. All the things a man my age should have considered sooner but never needed to, until now. By the time I ended the call, I had a clear understanding of what I needed to do next. And none of it involved funding a wedding that valued presentation over principle. I set the phone down and leaned back in my chair. The weight in my chest felt different. Not lighter, not heavier, just clearer. There are moments in life when the blueprint for the future redraws itself whether you're ready or not. This was one of those moments. And I wasn't as unprepared as I'd feared. That night, I made myself a simple dinner, something Marlene used to make when winter set in early. The house was quiet except for the hum of the heater and the faint crackle of the old pipes. I ate at the kitchen table alone, but it wasn't loneliness that I felt. It was calculation. Not emotional calculation. Structural calculation. Engineers don't guess. We measure. We test. We identify weak points and reinforce what's worth saving. And sometimes, we demolish what has become too unsafe to stand. After dinner, I washed the dishes, dried them, and put them back exactly where they belonged. A ritual. A grounding act. My mind went back to Dana's face earlier that day. The entitlement, the expectation, the casual dismissal of the life built inside these walls. How easily she talked about selling the house. How her eyes never once landed on the memories around her. How she spoke about a fresh start, as if the past had no value. It wasn't the wedding that hurt me. It was the way she made me feel small in the home where she once took her first steps. And that realization changed something inside me. I walked into the living room and stood in front of Marlene's picture. She was smiling the way she always did when she wanted to reassure me that everything would work out. "I think I finally see it," I whispered. "I think I finally understand what we missed. Loving a child is easy. Teaching them gratitude is not. Somewhere along the line, I had failed to teach her the second part. But failure didn't mean surrender. And surrender wasn't an option anymore. Tomorrow, I thought, the real work begins. Not the wedding, not the money, not the negotiations. The work of reclaiming the boundaries that should have existed all along. I turned off the lights, walked down the hallway, and went to bed, not angry, not broken, but ready. Ready in a way I hadn't been in years. And when I woke the next morning, before the sun had even risen, I knew exactly what my next step had to be. The morning after my conversation with Mark, I woke with a clarity that felt almost foreign. For months, maybe years, I'd been moving through life like a man trying to hold up a collapsing structure with his bare hands. But now, for the first time, I wasn't holding anything up. I was evaluating, assessing, planning. The foundation of my relationship with Dana had cracked long before yesterday's meeting in the living room. I just hadn't wanted to admit it. I showered, shaved, and made myself a strong cup of coffee, the kind that warms your chest and wakes your mind. Then I sat at the kitchen table with a notepad and pen. Old habits die hard. Engineers think better when the thoughts are written down. Across the top of the page, I wrote one word: cost. Not the financial cost, the emotional cost, the personal cost, the cost of allowing someone, even someone you love, to keep taking pieces of you until there's nothing left. I listed the obvious things first: the joint account, the wedding expenses, the entitlement. But then the deeper costs came. The loss of respect, the loss of gratitude, the loss of connection between father and daughter. Each line I wrote made something inside me settle into place. This wasn't about a wedding anymore. It was about a lifetime of imbalance reaching its breaking point. Around 10 that morning, I called the Hawthorne Manor Events office. A polite woman named Claire answered. "Good morning, Hawthorne Manor Events. This is Claire speaking." "Good morning, Claire. My name is Leo Carter." A brief silence. Then the tone in her voice shifted into practiced professionalism, the kind meant for high-paying clients. "Yes, Mr. Carter, of course. How can I help you?" "I'd like a copy of the contract for my daughter's wedding reservation." There was a rustle of paper on her end. "Of course. One moment." When she returned, her voice was bright. "All right, I have it in front of me. What would you like to review?" "Everything," I said. "Walk me through it." And she did, line by line, fee by fee, condition by condition. With every paragraph she read aloud, my stomach tightened, not because the numbers shocked me anymore, but because of what they implied. Dana had already committed me to an event that exceeded the budget of most small businesses. Champagne packages, custom decor installments, high-security staff for guest comfort, a private string ensemble, a late-night luxury shuttle for the guests who wanted to visit the Alderidge family's country club after the reception. It wasn't a wedding. It was a performance staged to impress a crowd she desperately wanted approval from. When she finished reading, I asked the question I knew would matter later. "Who is listed as the responsible party for payments?" "You are, Mr. Carter," she answered. "All billing information is under your name and authorized signature." My signature. A signature I hadn't given. "I'd like a digital copy sent to my email," I said. Right away, when the document arrived, I opened it and scanned every page. And there it was, my name scrawled at the bottom of the contract. But it was not my handwriting. It wasn't even close. My heart didn't race. My breath didn't quicken. I simply stared at it the same way a structural engineer stares at a hairline fracture, with calm recognition that something foundational had failed. Dana had forged my signature. And that wasn't just disrespect. It was fraud. A crime. She hadn't just walked past a boundary. She had bulldozed it. I sat back in my chair, the glow of the computer screen reflecting off the framed photo of me and Dana from when she was 8 years old. She had a missing front tooth and her arms wrapped tightly around my neck, proud of the crooked birdhouse we built together. I didn't recognize the woman she had become now. Or maybe I did, and I just didn't want to. My phone buzzed. A text. From Dana. "Dad, just checking in. Did you review everything? We need to move quickly. The planners want confirmation." No apology. No gratitude. Not even curiosity about how I felt. Just urgency, because she believed that I existed to move her plans forward. I didn't respond. Instead, I forwarded the forged contract to my lawyer. Then I went for a walk. The air outside was crisp, cold enough to remind me I was still alive and still capable of making decisions. I walked through the neighborhood, past homes I had watched being built from empty lots to family spaces. Every house had a different story, some joyful, some tragic, all held together by the same principles of design and effort. My feet carried me without thinking, and soon I found myself standing in front of the old hardware store where Marlene and I used to stop for supplies. She loved that place. She used to say, "A house is never finished, Leo. It's a living thing. It needs attention." Marriage had been the same for us. We paid attention. We reinforced the weak spots. We continued building even when life got heavy. That was the difference. Marlene built with me. Dana expected me to build for her. Inside the store, I wandered the aisles slowly. I didn't need anything, but being surrounded by tools and lumber reminded me of what I valued: work, purpose, creation. Not extravagance, not status, not performance. When I returned home, there were 5 missed calls from Dana, 2 from Evan, and 1 voicemail from an unfamiliar number that turned out to be the wedding planner, her voice full of manufactured concern. "Mr. Carter, it's Amelia from Premier Events. Dana mentioned some delays with your financial confirmations. We really need to move forward this week. Please call me back as soon as possible." Their urgency didn't concern me. It clarified things. They weren't coordinating a celebration. They were coordinating an extraction, and I was the resource. I deleted the voicemail and sat down at my desk again. If Dana wanted a wedding handled like a business transaction, then I would handle it exactly like one. I opened a blank document and wrote another word across the top of the page: resolve. Under it, I listed everything that needed to happen next. Call attorney. Freeze joint account. Cancel all unauthorized contracts. Notify financial advisor of fraudulent signature. Review estate plan. Prepare protection strategy. But then I added one more line, something I had never imagined writing in my lifetime. Consider redefining relationship with daughter. The words sat heavily on the page. They took effort to write, effort to accept, but their presence was honest. For too long, I had mistaken silence for peace, compliance for love, financial support for parenting. Dana didn't grow entitled overnight. She grew that way because I allowed it. But that phase of my life, the phase where I surrendered boundaries for the sake of avoiding conflict, was over. While I was staring at that list, the front doorbell rang. The sound cut through the quiet house like an alarm. I stood, walked down the hallway, and opened the door. Dana stood on the porch, binder in hand, jaw tight, eyes flashing with the same impatience she used to have when she was a teenager, and I told her no for the first time. "Dad?" she said sharply, brushing past me into the entryway without waiting for an invitation. "Why aren't you answering your phone? We have deadlines. You're putting everything at risk." She wasn't there to talk. She was there to pressure. That realization didn't anger me. It clarified the blueprint, the correction, the next steps. I closed the front door behind her with a soft click and turned to face her. For the first time in years, I felt the ground steady beneath my feet. Dana didn't bother taking off her coat. She stood just inside the doorway, binder hugged tight to her chest like a shield, eyes already narrowed in irritation. "You're not answering my calls," she said. "No hello. No are you okay. Just an accusation." I studied her for a moment. Same dark hair as her mother, same eyes, but none of Marlene's softness left in them. "I've been thinking," I replied. My voice was calm, almost too calm. It made her blink. She wasn't used to that tone from me. She was used to me scrambling, fixing, smoothing things over. "Thinking about what?" she demanded. "Dad, we're on a schedule. The planner needs confirmations. The venue needs the next payment. I told them you would handle it." She said it the way someone might talk about putting out trash on Tuesday. Routine. Expected. Automatic. I stepped back and gestured toward the living room. "Sit down," I said. "If this is going to be handled, we might as well talk like adults, not like people yelling through a doorway." She hesitated, then walked past me. Her heels clicked on the hardwood. She sat in the same spot she'd occupied yesterday, on the leather sofa across from the coffee table I'd built myself. The binder landed with a soft thud. For a moment, it felt like we were replaying the same scene. Only this time, I wasn't walking into it blind. I took my chair across from her, the one angled slightly toward the fireplace. Marlene's picture sat above it, watching this quiet war unfold. "All right," I said. "Why are you really here?" She frowned. "I just told you. We need to move forward. You're dragging your feet. It's making things complicated. The Aldridges are asking questions." There it was. The real pressure point. Not me. Not the budget. The Aldridges. "What are they asking?" I said. "Whether you're going to follow through." She snorted. "They're asking if everything's stable." If you're up to it. I raised an eyebrow. Up to it. You know what I mean, she said quickly. It's a lot to manage. Big contracts. Large amounts. They're just concerned about reliability. They don't want any surprises. Reliability, I repeated. You mean they want to know if the old man who's paying for everything is still functional? Dana rolled her eyes. Don't twist it. They just come from a world where these things are handled a certain way. It's normal for the bride's family to pick up the bill. They just expect it to be handled properly. Handled properly. I let the words sit there between us. She shifted, uncomfortable, then grabbed the binder and flipped it open. Here, she said briskly. Let's just go through what's next. The second payment for Hawthorne Manor is due in 3 days. The planner's retainer needs to be replenished, and the florist requires a 50% deposit to lock in the imports. If you just transfer the money to the joint account, I'll make sure everything gets paid on time. Her pen was already uncapped, ready to write numbers like she was annotating a report. I studied her face. There was no doubt, no hesitation, no guilt, just the annoyance of someone who thinks their carefully laid plan is being delayed by an incompetent subcontractor. Dana, I said quietly, how many of these contracts have you already signed using my name? The pen froze in her hand. The question landed between us like a steel beam dropped onto concrete. What? She asked, instantly defensive. What is that supposed to mean? I didn't raise my voice. I didn't glare. I just watched her, steady. Hawthorne Manor sent me a copy of the agreement, I said. They were very helpful. They read me the payment terms. And then they emailed over the document with my name on it. Only problem is, the signature at the bottom isn't mine. Her cheeks flushed, just a little. Not from shame. From being caught off guard. They must have made a mistake, she said quickly. These places deal with hundreds of contracts. You probably signed something at a visit and don't remember. Or the planner, Dana. I cut in, still calm. I haven't been to Hawthorne Manor in 10 years. And I've never met the planner. That signature is not mine. Her jaw tightened. For a moment, she dropped the performance. I saw the calculation in her eyes. Do I lie harder, or do I switch tactics? She chose the second. Okay, she said, taking a breath, softening her tone. Dad, I didn't think this would turn into a big issue. The planner said we needed to secure the date immediately, or we'd lose it. You weren't picking up that day, and there was a time limit. So, I authorized it. For you. The way you would have. The way I would have, I repeated. By copying my signature. You're blowing this out of proportion, she snapped. It's just a formality. Everybody does it. It's not like I signed something you wouldn't have agreed to. We both know you were going to pay for it anyway. I let her words hang in the air. Do you hear yourself? I asked. You just told me you decided for me. You committed my money, my name, and my legal responsibility without asking. Because you assumed my answer. She bristled. You're my father. That's what fathers do. They step up. They don't nitpick the signature on a document that benefits their own family. Benefits, I echoed, feeling the words sink in like a stone dropped in dark water. Does it benefit me, Dana? She blinked. What does that even mean? I leaned forward slightly, resting my elbows on my knees. Tell me, I said quietly. How does this wedding benefit me? I've heard what it does for you. For Evan. For the Aldridges. For your image. But what does it do for me? She stared at me like I had suddenly started speaking another language. It's not about benefit, she said. It's about doing the right thing. It's about being proud. Every father wants to see his daughter have the best. Don't you want to show people what you've built? What you can provide? I've already built what I wanted to, I answered. It's sitting under this roof. It wore your mother's smile. It learned to walk across this floor. It sat at this table doing homework. I paused. The rest is decoration. She laughed once, sharp and humorless. You really don't get it, do you? She said. This isn't the 80s. People don't just have weddings in church halls with cold chicken and bad music anymore. This is about positioning. It's about stepping into a different life. It's about showing the Aldridges that we belong at their level. That we're not small. That word cut more cleanly than I expected. Small. And you think I'm small? I said quietly. She didn't answer. She didn't have to. Her silence said enough. Dana, I continued, my voice steady. Do you know what my career actually did? She rolled her eyes. Yes, Dad, you built bridges and roads and whatever. We've been over this. No, I said. You've heard it. But you've never cared. I designed structures that carried thousands of people a day safely over water, through mountains, across dangerous terrain. I spent nights staring at stress calculations to make sure a stranger got home to their family. I missed dinners. I missed weekends. Your mother held this house together, so I could do that. What I did wasn't glamorous. No string quartets. No imported flowers. But it mattered. It still matters. She shifted in her seat as if my words were an inconvenience more than a revelation. That's fine, she said. You did what you did. But this is my life now. My future. Don't you want me to have something more than what you had? I looked slowly around the room. At the photograph of Marlene. At the wall with pencil marks recording Dana's height over the years. At the worn spot on the carpet where our old dog used to sleep. I had more than enough, I said. I had a wife who respected the work it took to build this life. I had a daughter who used to think her dad hung the moon because he could fix a broken chair and explain why the sky was blue. Somewhere along the line, that stopped being enough for you. Because it isn't enough, she snapped back. You don't understand the world I have to live in. The Aldridges don't care that you fixed some street or designed some overpass. They care that their son marries into a family that looks like theirs, that can host the kind of event they're used to. Do you have any idea what it would look like if this wedding was cheap? I stared at her, a slow realization settling in. You're not afraid the day won't be special, I said. You're afraid you'll be embarrassed. Of course I am, she shot back. Do you know how many people are flying in? How many of Evan's family and colleagues are coming? This is my introduction to that world. And you're dragging your feet over money you can't even spend in your lifetime. I let the insult land. Then I turned it over carefully, like examining a cracked beam. You're right about one thing, I said. I won't spend all of it. But that doesn't mean it belongs to you. Her eyes flashed. I never said it did. You didn't have to, I replied. You already signed as if it did. For the first time since she arrived, Dana's confidence slipped. Just a fraction. Her eyes darted away, then back. She tightened her grip on the binder. You act like I've done something unforgivable, she said. All I've done is push to make this a day we can all be proud of. Why do you have to fight me on that? Because I'm tired, I said simply. Tired of being treated like a funding source instead of a father. Tired of being handed bills instead of conversations. Tired of hearing words like standard and positioning when all I really wanted was to see my daughter happy without needing a price tag to prove it. I watched that land. For a second, I thought it might get through. Her face softened. Her eyes almost flickered with something familiar. Then it was gone. Happiness costs money, Dad, she said flatly. That's just reality. And you're in a position to help. That's reality too. I shouldn't have to feel guilty for expecting you to show up like every other father. You expect, I said. You don't ask. There's a difference. She sighed heavily and closed the binder with a snap. If this is about control, just say so, she muttered. If you want your name on everything, fine. If you want to make a speech about your values, fine. But don't pretend like you can't afford this. Don't pretend this is some moral stand when it's just you being stubborn. I looked at her for a long moment, and in that silence I realized something important. She really believed that. In her mind, I was the obstacle, the problem. Not the man who spent 40 years building something from nothing. Not the man who paid for college, cleared her debts, helped her move 3 times, and quietly filled her fridge when she was starting out. Just the man standing between her and a fantasy she believed she deserved. I'm not pretending, I said finally. I'm evaluating, like I've done with every structure I've ever worked on. And what I see right now is a project that will collapse the moment I stop holding it up. I won't build something that can't stand on its own. She stared at me, then shook her head, a bitter smile curling at the corner of her mouth. You know what, she said. Maybe you're right. Maybe we can't rely on you. Maybe I should have listened to Evan when he said trying to involve you would just complicate things. There it was. Is he outside? I asked. Her eyes flicked to the window by the driveway, then back. That's not the point. It is to me, I said. Because it tells me something important. I'm not part of this. Not really. I'm a box you were trying to check. A number you were trying to secure. I stood up slowly. She stayed seated, her shoulders tense, waiting for the explosion I knew she expected. A slammed door, a shouted threat, a dramatic ultimatum. It didn't come. Instead, I walked to the mantel, adjusted the frame of Marlene's picture by a fraction of an inch, and then turned back. Dana, I said quietly, I'm going to look at everything. Carefully. The contracts. The accounts. My own future. When I make my decision, it will be final. There won't be another conversation about it. I want you to understand that. Her eyes narrowed. What does that mean? It means, I said, that for the first time in a long time, I'm going to choose what's right for me, not what's easiest for you. We held each other's gaze for several long seconds. A silent pressure test. So that's it, she said finally. You're just going to think about it? The contempt in her voice was impossible to miss. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. My silence was my answer. She grabbed the binder, stood up, and moved toward the door. Evan was right, she muttered as she passed me. You don't understand how the world works anymore. I opened the door for her. She walked out without another word. Through the glass, I saw Evan sitting in his car at the curb, fingers drumming anxiously on the steering wheel. She slid into the passenger seat, talking fast, hands cutting through the air as she explained. His eyes flicked up toward the house, then away. They drove off a few seconds later, faster than they should have on a quiet street. I closed the door gently and stood there for a moment, listening to the silence. No shouting, no slammed cabinets, just the steady sound of my own breathing. This was no longer a misunderstanding, no longer a miscommunication. It was a final assessment, the last stress test. And my conclusion was simple. The structure was unsound. Reinforcement wasn't enough. A controlled demolition was the only option. I walked back to my study, sat down at the desk, and picked up my phone. It was time to call my lawyer. The next morning felt unnaturally still, as if the entire house were holding its breath. Sunlight slid through the blinds in thin, pale lines, catching dust in the air that made the room feel older, heavier, like a museum of a life waiting to be boxed and archived. I sat at my desk with a mug of coffee cooling beside me, untouched. I watched the steam fade into nothing, quiet and temporary, the way my own patience had been for years. My phone lay face down on the desk. I hadn't touched it since the night before, but I knew what would be waiting. When I finally picked it up, the screen lit with chaos. Missed calls from Dana, missed calls from Evan, and a string of polite, carefully worded texts from the Aldridge family. They weren't checking on anyone's well-being. They were checking on their wedding investment. I set the phone aside and opened my laptop, letting numbers fill the screen. My numbers. Accounts I fought for, saved for, earned day by day, year by year. Real numbers tied to real work, not fantasy expenses tied to status and appearances. Seeing them grounded me. It reminded me that for all the insults and entitlement thrown my way, I was still the one who built a life brick by brick, while others pretended they were born on marble floors. Then the phone vibrated again, one call this time. My lawyer. Ben Carter's voice was steady, professional, and sharper than usual. Mr. Larson, he said. I got your message. Sounds like things have escalated. I'm here. Tell me what you need. I didn't start with emotion. I laid out the facts like a structural report. My daughter had signed contracts using my name, opened accounts assuming I would fund them, built her entire wedding on the foundation of my silence and her belief that I wouldn't fight back. And finally, when I asked a reasonable question, she told me my life's work was worthless. Ben listened without interrupting. When I finished, he asked only one thing. Are you ready to restructure everything? I am, I said, and I meant it. He started outlining a strategy, closing accounts, retracting authorization, restructuring assets, sealing liabilities, and documenting every instance of unauthorized spending. He talked like an architect drafting a blueprint. I listened like a man ready to build something new on top of the ruins. But then he paused. Leo, he said quietly, there's something in your tone that isn't legal. It's personal. Do you know what you want this to accomplish? I looked across the room at a framed photo of my late wife, Marlene. She stood in her garden with a smile that could make the world feel safe. She lived simply, honestly, and with values my daughter no longer recognized. Yes, I said. I want to protect what I've built, and I want to stop being used. Ben didn't soften his tone. He respected clarity. Then come in tomorrow morning. We'll put everything in motion. When I hung up, it felt like the room exhaled for the first time in hours. The fear was gone. The confusion was gone. All that was left was quiet, precise intention. A controlled demolition always begins with one realization. The structure is already compromised. You're just guiding its fall. I stood and walked through the living room, past the shelves Marlene once dusted every Sunday, past the table where Dana used to do homework before she stopped caring about anything that didn't have a price tag attached. The house felt different now, not because it had changed, but because I had. I wasn't clinging to it anymore. I was evaluating it, measuring what would stay and what would go. My phone buzzed again. A text from Dana. We need to talk. Right now? Then another. Evan's parents are asking questions. Everyone wants updates. Call me immediately. The urgency in her words didn't reach me. For years I had responded instantly, rushing to fix whatever crisis she created. Not today. I typed a single, calm reply. We'll talk soon, Dana. But next time, it will be on my terms. I set the phone down, turned off the light, and stood in the quiet, solid house she once dismissed as outdated. For the first time in a long while, I felt steady, certain, ready. The demolition hadn't started yet, but I was already holding the detonator. I didn't sleep much that night, but it wasn't the restless, anxious kind of sleeplessness I'd grown used to these past few months. It was something sharper, an alertness, a clarity, the kind that settles into your bones when you finally stop ignoring the truth and start acting on it. By the time dawn crept through the windows, I was already dressed, the house still and quiet around me. I moved through each room with a steady purpose, taking mental notes the way I used to on job sites. What was solid, what needed to go, and what would never be touched. The photo of Marlene stayed right where it was. Everything else was negotiable. My appointment with Ben was at 9. I arrived early, the morning air crisp against my face as I stood outside the glass doors of his office building. It felt strange, almost surreal, to be handling something so personal with the same efficient calm I'd once brought to multi-million-dollar engineering projects. But maybe that was the point. This wasn't a family crisis anymore. It was a structural correction. Ben ushered me into his office with a nod. A stack of papers sat neatly arranged on his desk, each page clipped, tabbed, and ready for signatures. He tapped the top sheet with his pen. "This," he said, "is the formal revocation of all implied or assumed financial commitments tied to the wedding." He flipped to the next. "This cancels your authorization on the joint account." Another page. "This restricts all access to any credit lines under your name." He paused, handing me a final document. "And this begins the creation of a trust. Once we finalize the details, everything you place in it will be untouchable." Untouchable. The words settled in my chest like a deep breath. I read each page slowly, signing where he indicated, my pen steady despite the shaking underneath my ribs. Every signature was a small act of taking my life back. Every stroke of ink was a reinforcement beam, a new support column replacing the parts of me that had been worn thin by years of unreciprocated giving. When we were done, Ben leaned back in his chair. "You're doing the right thing, Leo," he said. "Sometimes the most compassionate boundaries are the ones that seem harsh at first." "I know," I answered. "I just wish it didn't have to come to this." He tilted his head. "In my experience, it always comes to this when someone mistakes kindness for obligation." I left his office with the documents secured in a folder under my arm. Outside, the city moved around me with its usual noise and urgency, but none of it touched me. I walked slowly to my car, feeling strangely grounded. I'd taken the first real steps, and now the rest would unfold naturally. Not from anger, not from spite, but from a structure that had finally reached its limit load. When I got home, the first thing I noticed was the silence. Not peaceful silence. The kind that feels like a warning. My front door was locked, the lights off inside, no car in the driveway. But something was off. The air felt charged, unsettled. I stepped inside cautiously and saw it immediately, my phone blinking with new messages. Dozens of them. The most recent were from Dana. "Dad, answer me. Now. What did you do? The venue called. They said the next payment failed. Are you serious? Is this some kind of punishment? We need to talk before this gets worse." Before it gets worse. My daughter always spoke as if consequences were optional, like the world was a system designed to adjust itself around her decisions. But now, for the first time, she could feel the ground shifting beneath her feet. I placed the phone down without responding and walked into the kitchen. I needed water. Maybe a moment of stillness. But before I could even reach for a glass, the doorbell rang. One sharp, impatient chime. Then another, louder. A hollow echo through the hallway. I didn't rush. I walked to the door, opened it, and found Evan standing on the porch. He looked nothing like the composed, polished young man I'd met months earlier. His hair was uncombed, his shirt wrinkled, and there was a wild tightness in his eyes. He didn't bother with a greeting. "What's going on?" he demanded. "Why aren't you paying the vendors? My parents are calling me nonstop. They said the estate can't finalize the arrangements." I studied him for a long moment. His face was red with panic, not grief or concern, financial panic, social panic, image panic. "You're asking the wrong question," I said quietly. The real question is why everyone assumed I would pay for all of it without asking a single thing in return. That's what parents do, he snapped. Dana said you agreed. No. I cut in, my tone even. Dana assumed. You supported her assumption, and her assumption was wrong. His jaw tightened. Leo, you don't understand how this looks. My family is humiliated. People know. They're asking questions. And what exactly, I said, do you want me to do about that? That stopped him. He stared at me, stunned that I wasn't rushing to fix the mess he and my daughter had created. I stepped out onto the porch and closed the door behind me. I suggest, I said calmly, that you and Dana sit down and reevaluate your expectations. Because the foundation you were building your future on, you never checked whether it was actually yours. His eyes hardened. So you're really doing this? I'm doing, I said, what I should have done a long time ago. He opened his mouth as if to argue, but whatever words he had died on his tongue. He turned, walked down the steps, and got into his car without another word. I stayed on the porch long after he'd driven away. The sky was beginning to dim, the air cooling as the sun lowered itself behind the houses on the street. Somewhere in the neighborhood, a dog barked. A lawnmower buzzed. Life went on. Inside, my phone buzzed again. Dana this time, her messages flooding in one after another. Sharp, panicked, demanding. For years, I'd shaped my life around those messages. Not anymore. I walked back inside, shut the door, and let the quiet settle again. The next phase was coming, and I would need every ounce of clarity I had. Because the moment Dana realized the full extent of what was happening, that's when everything would truly begin to fall apart. By the time evening settled over the neighborhood, the air outside had turned heavy, as if the sky were holding its breath along with me. I stood at the kitchen counter cutting an apple one didn't intend to eat, listening to the rhythmic tick of the wall clock. It was the kind of silence that felt like the final beat before an impact, the moment when even the wind seems to wait for what comes next. I knew the message was coming before the phone buzzed. I didn't know how I knew. Maybe it was the years of conditioning, the habits built from a lifetime of responding to every problem Dana created. But when the phone finally lit up, I didn't flinch. Her name filled the screen. A long text this time, longer than usual. I opened it. I know something's wrong. Evan came home furious. He said you're refusing to pay for anything. I'm trying to stay calm, but I deserve an explanation. Please call me. It was the closest she'd come to sounding human in months. For a moment, I just stared at the words. My daughter, my only child, asking instead of demanding. But even now, her tone wasn't remorse. It was fear. Fear of loss. Fear of humiliation. Fear of consequences. Not fear of hurting me. Never that. I typed a short reply. Come by tomorrow. Noon. We'll talk. Nothing else. No comfort. No excuses. No fatherly softening. I set the phone down and finally bit into the apple. It tasted like nothing at all. Sleep came and went in shallow, fractured waves. When the morning arrived, I felt the same quiet focus I used to feel before presenting a major project, a calm certainty, anchored by the knowledge that I'd prepared for every outcome. At exactly 12:03, her car pulled into the driveway. I watched from the living room window as she stepped out, her movements rigid, almost cautious. She wasn't wearing her usual polished smile or her curated confidence. She looked smaller, not humbled, just cornered. The doorbell rang, a long, steady chime. I didn't rush. I opened the door slowly, finding her there with her shoulders pulled tight, jaw clenched. Dad, she said, we need to talk. We will, I answered, stepping aside. She walked in, scanning the house with an expression I couldn't quite read. Maybe it was the half-packed boxes on the floor. Maybe it was the absence of the old family photos she'd always ignored. Maybe it was just the unfamiliar feeling of being on uncertain ground. She sat on the edge of the sofa, Marlene's sofa, her hands twisting in her lap. I don't understand, she began, her voice thin. What's happening? Why are these vendors calling me? Why can't the estate confirm the deposit? Evan's parents think. This isn't about Evan's parents, I interrupted softly. She blinked, caught off guard. Dad, you told me you would help. You said you wanted to support us. You always have. I said I'd support you. I corrected. I didn't say I'd subsidize a performance. Her eyes flashed hurt, offense, disbelief. I couldn't tell. For the first time, I didn't care. What does that even mean? She asked. I walked past her, picked up a folder from the dining table, and placed it between us. These are the charges from the last 3 months, I said, tapping the pages. Not the ones you showed me. The ones you hid. Her face paled, not from guilt, but from being found out. Dad, I can explain. No, I said. You can't. And more importantly, you don't need to. She swallowed hard, her throat tightening as she tried to collect herself. Why didn't you come to me first? She demanded, her voice sharpening. Why would you go behind my back and behind your back? I repeated, almost gently. Dana, you used my name, my accounts, my credit. You used the life I built. The back you're talking about is the same one you've been standing on for years. She flinched. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The clock ticked loudly in the quiet room. All right, she finally whispered. Fine. I overspent. I made mistakes. But we can fix it. You can still help us. I know you can. There it was, the assumption. The default belief that no matter how deep the hole she dug, I was obligated to fill it. I can, I agreed. But I won't. Her eyes widened, shimmering with a mixture of fury and fear. Dad, you're ruining everything. Do you understand that? This is my wedding. My only wedding. Your first, I said quietly. She froze. The words landed harder than I intended, but I didn't take them back. You have never built anything, I continued. Not the life you want. Not the stability you claim to value. Not even this wedding. You've borrowed everything, including respect. Dad, you didn't ask me for help, I said. You expected it. And when I questioned anything, you insulted everything I've ever worked for. Her composure snapped. Because your life is small. She burst out. You live in this house like it's 1985, you cling to old memories, you do everything the boring, sensible way, and you think that makes you some kind of hero? I'm trying to have a better life than you did. If you'd said that honestly, I replied, I might have helped you build it. But you don't want a life. You want a stage. She stood abruptly, pacing now, her breath sharp and unsteady. So what? You're cutting me off? After everything? You're just going to watch my wedding fall apart? I didn't raise my voice. It's already falling apart. I'm just not holding it up anymore. She stared at me as if seeing me clearly for the first time. And then, just as quickly, her expression hardened into cold, practiced resentment. Everyone will know, she said. Everyone will know what you did. Good. She blinked, stunned. I stepped toward the window, looking out at the yard Marlene once tended every spring. For the first time in your life, I said, people will finally see who built what and who destroyed it. She was silent, completely silent. And then her voice broke, just a fraction. I don't know who you are anymore. I turned to her. That's because you've only ever known the version of me that bent to keep you happy. She shook her head, grabbed her bag, and walked toward the door with fast, uneven steps. Her voice cracked as she said, You'll regret this, Dad. You will. No, I said softly. I regret waiting this long. She left without another word, the door slamming behind her, the echo rolling through the empty hallway like a final verdict. I stood there in the quiet house, feeling something I hadn't felt in years, stability. It wasn't joy. It wasn't triumph. Just a calm, unshakable certainty. The structure had shifted. The lines had been redrawn. And tomorrow would bring the collapse she never believed possible. The days after the ruined wedding passed with a strange, weightless quiet. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel guilty. It was something in between, something steadier and heavier, like a structure settling into its new foundation after a long shift in the earth. I kept packing the house, room by room, sorting through 40 years of a life that had been lived honestly, even if it had never looked impressive to the people who thought status was the only real currency. The sold sign outside remained planted in the yard like a punctuation mark. Every time I walked past the window, I saw neighbors slow down as they drove by, lingering for a moment, their faces puzzled. They didn't know the story, only that a house that had been the quiet anchor of the street was suddenly changing hands. That was fine. The truth didn't belong to them. It barely belonged to the people who had tried to weaponize it. A week after the wedding debacle, I was in the garage sorting through old toolboxes when my phone buzzed. I almost ignored it, assuming it was another automated message from the real estate office, but then I saw the name. Dana. Not calling. Texting. I'm coming by today. No question. No greeting. Just an announcement. The daughter who had declared my life worthless was now asking for an audience without asking at all. I didn't reply. I put the phone down, wiped the dust off my hands, and continued sorting through sockets and screwdrivers that had more history than she seemed to believe my entire career did. It was nearly evening when her car pulled up. She didn't storm out the way she had the last time. She walked slowly, measured steps, arms folded across her chest, her hair pulled back in a simple ponytail instead of the elaborate curls I'd seen earlier that week. She looked younger than I'd seen her look in years. Not softer, just less armored. She stopped in the driveway and didn't speak at first. She seemed to be searching for a script that wasn't there. It was the first time in a long time she'd arrived somewhere without a prepared monologue. "Dad," she finally said. I waited. She swallowed. "I didn't come to yell." "That's good," I answered. "I'm a little tired of yelling." A faint, humorless smile flickered across her face as if she wanted to soften the moment but didn't know how. She walked closer and stepped into the garage, her eyes tracing the shelves, the boxes, the unfinished piles of my life packed for departure. "So, you're really selling the house," she said. "I did sell it," I corrected. "Closing is next week." She nodded, absorbing that. "And you're really moving? Starting over?" "Yes." Her eyes moved across the room again. For a moment, she looked like she was seeing the tools, the workbench, the old drafting table not as clutter, but as pieces of a man she never really bothered to understand. "Why now?" she asked quietly. "Because staying here," I said, meant holding on to a version of my life where I kept making myself smaller to fit inside other people's expectations. She flinched, but she didn't look away. "I didn't mean to say those things," she murmured. "About your life. About the things you built." "Maybe you didn't," I replied. "But you meant the belief behind them." The silence that followed was long and heavy, not uncomfortable, but honest. She wasn't fighting me anymore. She was listening, finally. "You really created that foundation?" she asked. "It's not some threat or punishment." "It's already funded," I said. "The first round of students has been selected." She looked down at her hands, twisting the hem of her sleeve. "You used the wedding money." "I used my money," I said again. "Money that should have honored something bigger than an evening of impressing people who don't remember a single detail the next week." She nodded slowly, her jaw tightening. "People talked about the wedding for days," she said. "About what happened. They kept asking me why everything fell apart like that. Why the venue wouldn't open the gates. Why none of the vendors showed." "I imagined so." She inhaled deeply. "I told them you canceled everything." "That's the truth," I said. She nodded. "But I didn't tell them why." I studied her face. She wasn't defensive, not anymore. Just hollowed out in a way that meant the weight of consequences had finally become real. "Why did you come today, Dana?" Her lips pressed together. She struggled for a moment before answering. "Because everything that happened made me look at myself. At how I treated you. At what I thought mattered." A sharp breath escaped her. "At what I became." It wasn't an apology. Not yet. But it wasn't denial, either. For her, that was already progress. She looked at the floor. "I've been angry at you for a long time. Because you always seemed content with normalcy. With being stable. With not trying to fit into certain circles. I thought you didn't understand the life I wanted. And you thought the life I lived was an embarrassment," I said. She didn't argue. Instead, she whispered, "The foundation, it's beautiful. Mom would have loved it." "She would have?" I said softly. Another silence. This one warmer. "Dad," she said finally, Can I help? With the foundation? Not financially. Just help." I looked at her. Really looked. Her face wasn't hard now. She wasn't demanding. She wasn't entitled. She wasn't trying to manipulate an outcome. She was standing in front of the rubble of her own choices, asking, not for a handout, but for a place to rebuild. "You can attend the next scholarship meeting," I said. "If you want. Just observe." She exhaled, as if she'd been holding that breath for years. "Okay," she whispered. "I want that. I really do." She turned slightly, eyes drifting across the garage again. "You know, I always thought your tools were boring." She gave a small laugh. "But now they look like history, like the story of your life." "They are," I said. "Everything in here built something." She nodded, looking suddenly overwhelmed. "I'm sorry," she said quietly. "It wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. But it was real." "I know," I answered. She stepped back, wiping her cheek quickly before it could become a scene. "I'll text you," she said. "About the meeting." "I'll be here," I replied. She left slowly, not storming, not running, just leaving, like a person who'd been inside a building too long and had finally stepped out into fresh air. I watched her car disappear down the street, then turned back to the garage. One box remained open on the floor. Marlene, letters and photos. I knelt, Picked up a single old photograph. Marlene standing in front of a bridge I helped design back in '94, smiling like I'd done something miraculous. She never thought my life was worthless. And now, finally, neither did I. The demolition was complete. The rebuild had begun. And maybe, just maybe, my daughter would learn the difference between things built to impress and things built to last. What was your favorite moment? Drop it in the comments below, and don't miss more thrilling stories like this. Subscribe and hit that notification bell so you never miss an upload.